Welcome to this second section of this roundtable on volunteering youth and empowering social integration in Europe. My name is Andrea Carlai. I'm a researcher at Eurek Research in Bolzano in Italy. And together with Ursula Rieger from the Austrian Academy of Science, we will moderate this session. Now, after hearing about all these great projects, in this session, the plan is to focus on the document that you have received on Volpower's policy recommendations, fostering youth volunteering among EU national and country nationals, and more in general to speak about the problems and challenge of volunteerism and volunteering. Just to let you know how this session is organized, we will start with some brief reflection on the policy recommendation by the people that are listed in the program. So Yulia Barbu, sorry if I'm not pronouncing correctly the name, Lakopoulos, who is program manager and co-coordinator for AMIF-PROJECTs. Then we have Leila Sey-Relic, who is the president of Center for European Volunteering, as well as founder and managing director of Volunteering Center of ZIAC. I hope you can hear me well because I have some noise. George Thompson, who is a CEO or retired CEO, if I understood correctly, for Volunteer Scotland, as well as advisory board member of Volpower, as well as member of the board of the Center for European Volunteering. Robin Harper, who is professor of political science at York College at City University of New York. And last but not least, Susan Rothman from Ozigin University in Istanbul. After this brief reflection by these people, we will later on, Ursula will open up the discussion to all the participants in this roundtable. So we'll hear their point of view and perspective on the challenge of volunteering and their experience in light of our policy recommendations. Just to give you a few, you got the document, but just really brief information about this policy recommendation. This is one of the output of the Volpower project. They were elaborated by myself, together with my colleague from Europe, Heidi Flarer, and my project partner from Austrian Academy of Science, so Ursula Rieger, Marie Lehner, and Astrid Mattes. But they were developed with a contribution with all Volpower partners, in particular Erasmus University Rotterdam, Glasgow Caledonian University, IRMO in Croatia, and Zavodapis in Slovenia. This is because what we have done in this policy recommendation is to put together the result of some focus group and meetings that were conducted in these 6 Volpower countries. Meetings conducted in particularly with representatives of the volunteering association that have collaborated in the Volpower project. These are associations dealing with sports or with the creative arts and culture, as well as with the key expert and practitioner like organizer volunteering activities, experienced volunteers, and local level volunteering coordinators. Because of COVID, sometimes this focus group didn't happen in person, but we have meetings online, or we collect exchange information via email. The recommendation deal with the issues of affecting youth volunteering in diversified European society. Our starting point, which is the starting point of all this project we heard today, is the importance of volunteering society, just to simplify, fostering human, social, and cultural capital, and particularly from a point of view, seeing volunteering as a tool to foster processes of inclusion, empowerment, and interaction among youth with and without migrant background. So the recommendation focus on a challenge of volunteering, measures to support volunteering and volunteering associations, and strategies and problems in recruiting young volunteers in general and among the population with migrant background, and reduce the barriers in the volunteering sector. They are directed to politicians at all levels, local, national, and international level, EU institutions and member states. And really important, they are developed specifically regarding, as you may see, formal volunteering, mainly volunteering that takes place through a volunteering association. So let's start now with some reflection from the people listed in the program. If it's okay, I go following the order that is written in the program. So we start with Julia Barbu-Lakopoulos. So here is the idea to hear about your perspective, your point of view, or general feedback on this document or policy recommendation in light of your experience, but also in light of your perspective in this case, as coming from, let's say, from a European institution. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. The presentations so far have been extremely interesting, and I'm sure that the discussion that will follow will also be very educational. With regard to this specific document, this was not the first time I received it for reading. It was submitted as a deliverable under one of our projects, so obviously I had read it before. And my, let's say, first thought about it was that it is extremely comprehensive, and it goes well beyond the realm of AMIF. So it doesn't deal just with volunteering for third country nationals or volunteering for in the specific context of migration. It goes well beyond that. And one of the things that I wanted to ask is if you are in touch with let's say, more teams that are more dedicated to these issues, because in the European Commission, inside DG ACT, we also have a unit that deals with youth and volunteering in particular, and then the IACE agency, the executive agency that deals with education, also has a unit that deals with these issues. So maybe for the, let's say, institutional part or the volunteering as a whole in the context of European Union, there is more valuable insight to receive from other services that have a more global view. With regard to the volunteers in the field of migration, I think that the number of projects that we have funded under AMIF that showcase volunteering, and many other projects that were not here today, but where we see involvement of volunteers, or even creation of community volunteering networks, or volunteering activities for families as a whole, not just for young people. It's a clear indication that yes, in the field of migration and integration, especially, these activities have a key role, and they are even so more important for the youth, because yes, a well-integrated young person will be a fully integrated citizen in the future. So I fully agree with the background and the context of what that is presented in the document. I have some, let's say, minor disagreement with regard to what you see as the role of a policy maker, because although I fully agree that policy making should be oriented towards enabling and facilitating volunteering at different levels, at local, at national, at EU level, I do wonder if it's realistic to assume that it was going to be the policymaker that will raise awareness, or that will try to track the best practices and create this link. So maybe here it's a bit overestimated the role that the policymaker will have in the actual implementation, not in creating the correct context or legal framework for this. But I'm sure that we will go into more specific points as the discussion follows, so maybe we can address this at a later moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. So I will pass now the word to Leila Sage-Frelic.
Thank you. Hello from Croatia, and thank you for the invitation. It is very important for Center for European Volunteering, the organization that I'm representing, to be a part of this dialogue. We believe it's very important dialogue, and so once again, thank you for the invitation. As far as for this document that I found also very comprehensive, and I also think it goes beyond just programs for migrants or that specific group. And I think that's good. That is really important when you talk about inclusiveness, to have a wider framework. And I think this is one of the greatest pluses of this document. I don't have major disagreements of what's in there. I'd like just to maybe add some of the perspectives. And I would like to draw them from the two important processes that CEV has been involved in recently. One is an international project that was dealing with the inclusion of youth through volunteering, actually measuring the impact of volunteering on the social inclusion of youth. And another one is a process that we find very, and it's still in continuation. It's actually now in very spot of our activities. Is that CV has started a process of dialogue, first of all with its members, and now with the wider circle of stakeholders, of drafting a blueprint for the European volunteering for 2030. So we believe that the next decade symbolically deserves also some thinking about the new trends and the important or key issues that volunteering will contribute, or that volunteering could contribute to. And one of the key points is inclusion. We believe for the future, inclusion is one of the topics when we talk about volunteering, or one of the fields or the values where volunteering can make a significant impact. When it comes to value of volunteering, and your document starts with it, it's worth to say that researchers around the world have provided in the past 2 decades even, quite a lot of evidence to support the importance of volunteering for individual and social well-being. But this doesn't seem not to be enough for volunteering to attract somehow sufficient political attention and to become one of the important public policies. In many, still in too many, I would say, places in Europe, public policy that targets enabling environment for volunteering is still on the margins of the circle of public policies. So the question is, what needs to change? It's probably that it's not just about volunteering, as it never is. Volunteering is just one social phenomenon, very much connected and in interrelation with other social trends and phenomena around us. And it's probably that volunteering needs to be a part of a greater transformative force, where indicators for our common well-being will not be narrowed to mainly economic parameters. So, so we believe that is one important energy that we need for the future. And we are sure that volunteering is going to be important, at least important part of that new approach or new energy for the future. I'm sure we will be able to go more in details for the discussion, but I would like just to mention two more important things that I find here important to discuss further, maybe a little bit beyond this document. When I talked about this international project, and we also did some research and of course went deep into discussion with volunteer involving organizations that are trying to organize inclusive volunteer programs. The measures or the support system that we should ask for our policymakers, or we should also be able to produce for ourselves as well, has to be targeted, because inclusive programs need additional resources. If they want to be high quality, if they want to follow the needs of our beneficiaries, and when we talk about migrants or any other disadvantaged group, the best solution is always, and we heard that from examples, is individual support. Mentoring has been mentioned so many times, and that's for a reason. And the reason is that we need to pay more attention and more individual approach to disadvantaged group, including migrants and refugees. And for that, we need more resources. And the processes are not quick. And we sometimes cannot show results very quickly. So we need more patience and more resources for these inclusive programs. Civil society initiatives and the growth of non-formal volunteering, I think it's also a very important topic, and it's been showcased in almost all European countries, that the crisis like this since 2015, even since we had this great influx, big influx of refugees, continuing now with the pandemic, that non-formal volunteering is in increase, and that also connected a little bit with the shrinking space for civil society, and in some countries, even during pandemic, with a limited space to involve volunteers. So citizens are finding the best way to spontaneously organize, but that has advantages and also has some challenges, and it would be also good to talk about that. The importance, yeah, okay, I think I'm gonna finish for now, okay.
Okay, thanks, Leila. Really, I'm sure we will try to have more space at the end to discuss all together all these really important points. And thanks for your observation. So now we move to George Thompson, please.
Thank you, Andrea, and very nice to see everybody. Thanks for inviting me on today. A wee hello to you, Leila, who's my president, and I think it's important to say but it's nice to see you here this afternoon as well. So I've been asked just in 2 or 3 minutes to give my reflections on the recommendations. So what I've done, given the short time, has just been to focus in on the recommendation 7, volunteering and migration. And I think what Volpower, in the difficult circumstances that you've had, clearly over the last couple of years, it could have been really a project on resilience rather than on migration, I think, what you had to face. But anyway, it's clear to me that the Volpower project has clearly evidenced and shown the value that volunteering has for integration, the vital work that is involved in there. And I especially like the way in which you've used the term newcomers. And it does remind me a little bit of a wonderful project in the States that was dealing with ex-convicts, ex-cons, and they called that the Homecomer Project. So that word is really important, so that newcomer, invited in, playing a role. And for me, again, my attention these days, as somebody that's spent a lot of time in volunteering, my attention goes much more to the voices of the volunteers and what am I hearing from them? What are they telling us? So it's really good that this project has, through the exhibition and through the video that we saw earlier and the other accounts, there's a really powerful volunteer voice at the core of their experience of what's been happening. So what have I heard? You know, obviously I'm just summarising in terms of what I've heard from those voices. Well, I think critically, they're all really majoring on relationships, on social capital. Relationships first, not transactions. So what I've heard in the stories is about friendships, belonging, identity. I loved the volunteer who spoke about being called the coach. So identity and identities, the ability to be different things and to have different offers to make through the volunteering side of things. So you could say that was the kind of the heart of things, the friendships, and then the hands, the creativity, the expression, the doing things together, making a difference, action. That came across loud and clear as well, particularly the creative front from this project. And that was lovely to witness that. And then, if you like, the head side was the volunteer voices talking about the difference that they had made. And that included their learning and their view of themselves and a number of different factors about really significant outcomes and changes for them. So what does that mean then? in terms of a message to policymakers? And I think it's quite straightforward. Listen to these volunteer voices. Listen deeply to them. And recognize that you are an external actor. You're not the important people, and that includes us. We are all external actors trying to generate the circumstances where our volunteers, young people in this case, are the actors. They're the key. Now, what the project to me has shown is something that we've known for a long time, and that is that people respond, that people are very willing and very able to contribute, no matter how vulnerable their circumstances, in volunteering spheres and spaces to the good effect that's come in here. The big barrier is not the volunteers, not the people, it's us. It's a system which is not working well enough to maximise the value that volunteering brings. So I think there are important policy lessons here, but listening and reflecting and that bit of humility perhaps about the role that we play is core to that. And I would commend to you what I think is one of the most seminal pieces of work on volunteering that I've read for a very long time, and that's from the United Nations. It was written in 2018. It's called The Thread That Binds, and it was written before COVID, but you know, the experience we've had through COVID, it's so fresh what they've written about the whole gambit of what volunteering is about. So I would commend that to you. And also just finish off
thanks,
with an invitation. That is that the work I'm doing just now, Andrea, is that, so I'm retired as Chief Executive, but I'm leading on the bid for Scotland to bring the World Volunteer Conference from IABI to Glasgow in 2024. So we're in the process of the judging of that. But I would hope that if we're successful in May 2024, it would be great to invite the Volpower voices and yourselves to come to Glasgow, where of course Glasgow Caledonian University is based as well, of course, and to share those voices and the lessons that you've brought about here through the project. So thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation, especially. But thanks for your important insights. So now we move on with Robin Harper.
Good morning. I'm from New York. I am so delighted to be here with you today. I totally enjoyed these presentations and learning about what you're doing. I'm coming in at the end of this project, so for me, a lot of this is fresh, and it really it was very enjoyable. I want to preface these very short remarks by noting that my academic work deals really with questions of citizenship, social borders, and belonging. So I'm going to focus what I have to say on Section 7 and Section 8 on volunteering and migration and volunteering and legal status. And I do want to say, though, that I was really interested in all of the ideas about institutional building and connecting with and the creating a dialogue with policymakers and what policymakers should do, creating really some very valuable, concrete ideas for people to implement. So, and I also wanted to say that I was really impressed by the breadth and depth of the report. And it raised a lot of important issues about migration, volunteering, community citizenship. And as the report reveals, there's really a rich and varied experience of volunteerism that sometimes replaces, sometimes supplements, sometimes magnifies, and sometimes even invents wholly new programs for things that government does not, cannot, or will not do. And sometimes they're initiated faster, better than government can, and sometimes they serve a unique purpose that only volunteerism can do. And in the first instance, one of the things that occurred to me as I was reading this was really asking what we're expecting of members of our communities as a whole. So regardless of immigration status. And is volunteerism, should we be seeing this as the norm or the exception, and for whom? Much of the sections 1 to 6 refer to supporting cultures and practices of volunteerism for everybody. So what do we expect then from immigrants specifically? And I ask this because the sections on migrants seem to deal largely with the voluntary activities of those migrants who are in the most precarious circumstances, largely dealing with asylum seekers. So are we even considering how volunteerism fits into the incorporation of skilled or high income or migrant farm labor or family reunification immigrants, all different kinds of immigrants? And I'm wondering if there's data from the project to think about how to encourage volunteering for people regardless of their rationale for migration. What kinds of supports might be different for different kinds of immigrants that they would need or want in order to engage them in a culture of volunteerism? And, you know, this raises this question of what we can actually expect from immigrants, and especially from asylum seekers or for people seeking status as a whole. Is it, you know, it's problematic to count their voluntary action towards their permanent tenure, as the report indicates. Can people be penalized for not performing voluntary action? And if not, how do we reward people for doing things that help to build our communities? I'm wondering if there's this large question that many of you have raised, especially in this discussion portion, about the recruitment and how, you know, are we imagining that natives are so socially active that that volunteerism is the exception or the norm? And are migrants really behaving more like us when they don't volunteer? And are we teaching them, you know, to stand back and wait for somebody to come in and problem solve? So what overall does their participation say about modern citizenship? We should be fostering a culture of volunteerism, not because the state can't do things, although sometimes it can't, but because the voluntary sector can provide exactly the kinds of services for a community quicker in a community-tailored mode, and as the presentations show, perhaps more importantly, create social networks for people and what political scientists would call cross-cutting cleavages, connecting different people in different environments and providing them with identity and feeling of self-worth, as the other speakers have mentioned. The good that's produced is far greater than the stated objectives of any of these voluntary projects, which all of your presentations showed.
Okay.
So I'm wondering.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So I'm wondering about how policymakers can, if they're not already, developing mechanisms to foster more public-private partnerships, matching perhaps some more established volunteer organizations with new organizations, matching natives and immigrant organizations, and matching youth with other populations in the society, so with the elderly. And I really need to say this because about this section on volunteering and legal status, and I don't know any of the backstory, so I don't know how the recommendations came about. And I apologize if I'm saying something out of turn, but I even though I agree with the recommendations in the sidebar shaded box of section 8, they don't actually correspond with the concerns that the that you list as the issues in the overview. So what I'm really concerned here about is that we see that asylum seekers, I think I'm going on too long, but I will say that that there's really a larger issue that's here, which is that that there needs to be some imagination to match what the outcomes, what the suggestions are based on the problems that are in that section. So developing state norms for what we can permit and what we can't permit from people who are legally not able to work. Thinking about how volunteer activities can connect asylum seekers with the larger community, like the projects that we heard about today. Developing opportunities for people that are not language dependent and that can be picked up or dropped off in accordance with the available time that migrants have. Reimagine.
Robbie, sorry, I think we need to hear from, so we can come back on all these important points if you don't mind. If we can
Absolutely.
move to Susan, then we go back for leave this time for a broader discussion. Susan, please, Susan Rothman, last but not least.
Okay, thank you for inviting me, and I think maybe my comments will pick up on some of what Robin was what has been said. My expertise is also in belonging and migration, so I guess a lot of us are focusing on that. But it was wonderful to hear about all the projects and to read these recommendations. It's very inspiring. It gives a lot of positive energy and hope. In general, to thinking about what people are doing around these issues. I wanted to first talk about belonging. I don't dispute that volunteering would lead to belonging or social integration, but I'm just wondering how the different projects operationalize belonging or measure integration. In the video from Volpower, where people were talking about how the projects meant something to them. How do you know how belonging specifically was increased in what ways through the projects? I just wondered if you thought about that at all. One thing I really liked about the report was that you pointed out that there would be variation in terms of the decision to volunteer according to the characteristics of migrants. So whether it's about their gender or their legal status or various other characteristics, because I think that also is linked to belonging, right? The extent to which they have some characteristics that make them in or outside of certain communities would also make them more or less able or willing or give them the opportunity to volunteer. My last point that I wanted to make was in terms of the one thing that for me was missing from the recommendations, although I gather this maybe wasn't your goal. I mean, you don't. This was kind of outside of your purview, but was looking at the agency of migrants in terms of the projects or in terms of volunteering. So how are the projects? How are migrants and those who are the newcomers and the locals? How are they involved? What are the power dynamics? How is equality ensured? How are people's voices valued? So, for example, in our research on migration, volunteers, people who volunteer with migration organizations who help newcomers are seen very positively by the newcomers. I mean, they're one of the friendly faces of migration. Right, compared to some of the other maybe state agencies that are much more strict and less friendly. But there can often be a kind of hierarchy where the newcomer is in an inferior position to the volunteer or the person who works at the organization, even if that person is themselves a former newcomer. I'm not saying that this boundary is something we can necessarily identify, but I was just wondering how you did you find that? I mean, when you were looking at any of the projects, when you're evaluating the recommendations, did you think of how newcomers should be included? And some of the presentations that we saw of the other projects, they talked about the EU Voice talked about for some reason the newcomers became producers at one point, and the In Common project, it sounds like you do a lot of training, cultural skills training to sort of make the newcomers leaders. So how do you think about the role of the newcomers versus the previous people? I don't know what the word for them is. That's my question. Thank you.
Old settled people.
Yeah.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks to all of you for this really important, relevant insights. I apologize again if sometimes I have to cut it short, but we will go back to all the important points that have been raised by you. Now I pass the words to my colleague Ursula. She will keep on leading this session, open up the discussion to everybody.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Also, thank you to the opening statements for the second session, and also to all the speakers from the AMIF project in the first session. I was deeply impressed with the wealth and the different approaches. So I see a lot of commonalities in the projects, and then also a lot of differences in terms of approaches and paths that have been taking in all these projects to work with volunteers. In this second part, I would now like to ask the representatives of the projects from the first section to take the floor and talk about the challenges of volunteering, also in light of the policy recommendations. So, did you have similar outcomes, or how do you assess these recommendations in light of your projects? Who wants to start? Please raise your virtual or real hands. We always have an option. Does anybody? I see. Yes, the colleague from Spain, please.
Yes, I would like to start because the In Common project was mentioned. So I would like to say that the training for the migrant women, it was in the key competence of ERF, and we choose the competence 5, personal, social, and learning to learn, the 6, citizenship, and the 8, cultural awareness of an expression. The volunteers were invited to participate in the trainings because the training was based more on the discussion and reflection about these issues than to provide knowledge about what is culture or what kind of culture. The result we seek was to reflect, to create a multicultural background for all, and to be volunteers and migrant people at the same level, because even newcomers, they are not people isolated with the culture. They come with a backpack, with a background that is worthy to share in the community. And the result we have is that some of the migrant women, because the scale, the citizenship scale, have some stages, not as, it is not a way to go, you are in the 1, then in the 2, then it's not one direction. There are circumstances of the women, so the different women in different stages may participate as participants mainly, but when they move, or because you know that migrants and asylum seekers and refugees are moving from different cities, looking for housing or even for a job. So they move by, they still were connected with the program and act as volunteers also. And the main finding is that they act as volunteers, not to help to integrate in the mainstream, to help to other women to manage in their daily living. And this was understood for them like a way socialization, to feel that they were active, they have value. So I think that the trailer of the Volpower project at the beginning of this session very linked to this, how it's more emotional thing, it's more to share, to create bonds. I think that is our main finding, that volunteer is a way to create bonds that can lead to the generation of social capital, in the sense of that this is a real integration. I don't think if I explained very well, because...
Oh, you did, Amparo. Thank you very much.
But I tried to... I read, finally, I read the guidelines, and of course, you have a very comprehensive framework and idea of volunteer that is much more than we did in the In Common project. And I think that the guidelines are it's very difficult to understand the guidelines like a close. No, I understand it like an open framework, like a basis to work and to move forward on volunteer. And in this sense, I agree with most of them. I agree with all of them. And my congratulations for the.
Thank you very much.
You did. And that's all.
Sorry, Amparo, what were you saying?
That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Anybody else from the other projects we heard about in the first session saying something about the challenges of volunteering in the light of our policy recommendations? Do we have anybody else who wants to comment or say something here? Martina Finesio, or our colleague from Hungary, probably, or our colleague from Greece. I mean, I can also, sorry, yes, Isabella.
If you allow, sorry.
Yeah, Stam, yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Actually, we need to mention that legislation in Greece since 2015 was not clear enough about asylum seekers and refugees. So we had the opportunity to fix somehow the legislation on this topic. So actually, current legislation is accepting people from countries like Syria, for example, which are accepted as asylum seekers. So all other people coming from Iraq, Afghanistan, Central African states, so they are considered as immigrants. It's now much more clear how to support those people. So the legislation, they gave us room to work much more efficient with those people. So there are other needs for one category and other needs for the other category. So this changed since 2015 and makes our lives a little bit easier on this. So we know how to proceed with people of different needs. This is, I would like to point it out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Something we can also open the floor. Yes, Susan, please. Susanna.
Yeah, it's me. Okay. Sorry, thank you. No, I just wanted to add maybe 2 things. First of all, yeah, the policy recommendations document was it's very comprehensive. So congratulations. It was really good to read it, and I found many statements and recommendations that are valid also in our countries of the project, and so I would yeah.
I think.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good, thank you. So I would mention maybe volunteering and the gender aspect of volunteering. So in our project, as I mentioned during my presentation, we had overwhelmingly more girls as local youth volunteers in the project, and although this was the fact in the first cycle, and project partners tried their best to reach more boys in the second cycle, but it was difficult because where they tried to recruit local youth volunteers were mostly like universities, like you know, social workers and other faculties. Where maybe, you know, young people would be more open to support and to mentor migrant children. And of course, these faculties are visited more by young women. So that was the thing. We didn't have a solution, so we just try to use many other channels to reach local youth. But yeah, I think this is important. Although we didn't have any conflict because of this, so all the boys and in the migrant boys were totally fine with the girl mentor. And actually there were really nice mentoring pairs there. So, but so it wasn't a problem, but we were also a bit cautious about this. So it was good. I was very happy to read about it in the document. And the other thing, which is not directly connected to our MINT project, is this the education aspect. I mean, the education system. And I just wanted to mention that, for example, in Hungary, it was introduced like a few years ago that high school students had to do 50 hours of volunteering by the end of their, before their graduation from high school. And I think this can be a really good step and first step to educate young people, because it's like they can do whatever they want. So there are no limitations. They just get to, you know, taste volunteering and why is it good, and they can really enjoy it, and it can give them a lot of good things. So yeah, so I think this is also very important to start educating young people at a very early age, and maybe this way when they grow up they will volunteer more.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Anybody else from the project? So I can open. Yes, Martina, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Well, I mean, our project is much related on volunteering for young instead of young volunteering themselves. But of course, I mean, an issue that I want to raise, I don't know if it can be useful in terms of your policy recommendation, is this aspect that was already mentioned of pressuring sometimes young migrants to do volunteering activities, whereas their needs and rights actually are, I mean, they have the right to look for job opportunities that, especially if they're not asylum seekers, are very pressuring, because they have like 1 year to legalize their position in terms of documents. So of course, there's often is not that they are not willing to, but they really cannot, because they have to look for a job, a house, and all these things in very short time. And that's why mentoring for us is a key for the integration. And another aspect that I would like to raise as well, I mean, in terms of, as I mentioned, different situation from asylum seekers, I think that they should be highlighted, because sometimes they are more vulnerable in terms of status according to system. In Italy, like this is an issue. In a year, it's very difficult to be autonomous if you're a foreign person. And in terms of limits, I would say, of volunteering, it's something that I mean, we see in our analysis on migration system as a whole, that many times, many aspects that should be responsibility of institutions, like language classes or accompaniment measures, are left on volunteers. And of course, I mean, by mentoring, but other actions, we respond to an emergency need, but from institutions that there has to be they should take responsibility for these activities for themselves. And then, of course, I mean, volunteers can can do more. They can maybe do something more targeted to specific situations. But the key is that institutions, they should respond to what is their commitment. Yeah. So this is something that that I really want to stress, because I see it here very clearly. I mean, when there is a volunteer, so the system just leaves everything on their shoulders, and this is not bearable. So this is just something that I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. We got aware of this too, and this is included in the point 11, this volunteering and its limits. So the shift of responsibilities to the volunteering sector, this really has to be monitored closely. Anybody else? I open the floor to everybody. George, please.
Thank you. I don't know, it just came to me.
Sorry, George, go ahead.
It was just something that came to my mind listening to what people were saying there. For some reason, I remembered I was involved in the London Olympics and Paralympics in 2012. And there were 70,000 volunteers. And because I was involved, I read with real interest a major report on the evaluation of the volunteers, of the 70,000 afterwards. And what struck me really strongly was that not a single volunteer spoke about the task that they did, the time that they spent, the transaction side. They all remembered the people, the feelings, the pride, the joy, what London felt like. It was principally that. And I think that no matter how much the top down tries to impress this as a transactional equation, the bottom up, the people's own experience, will always turn it into it being about people. So I think in a context of looking at newcomers, we really have got to ensure that it's relationship building, it's the core. Of course, task comes into it, but don't fall into the trap, the same trap that everybody else is falling into, that volunteering is about transactions.
Thank you, George. Isabella.
Yes, thank you. Well, challenges for volunteering in the light of your policy recommendation. Our challenge was, first of all, of course, to reach to some people willing to be a volunteer according to our scheme, because actually they're a bit out of the radar most of the times. Maybe because our standard volunteering proposals are pretty much modeled on a kind of a specific cultural scheme, so that to some people cannot be that appealing. And it's also a matter of building trust for people coming from countries from outside Europe. Many times, any kind of authority in a very broad sense of the country appears a kind of controlling organization. So it's really also a matter of trust many times. So we found out that if you have a very specific micro level local eye, this matter of trust can be overcome quite well. And as far as all the many detailed matters you touch in your policy recommendations, some of them recognized, some of them, at least on paper, but also in fact, in Italy are not problems anymore, because there are structures which are there to provide training to volunteers, are there to provide consultancy for legal matters, for accountancy matters, for building up their web presence. So, I mean, in terms of services, I would say that organized volunteering in Italy is not in the worst situation. What was instead quite hard for us was the relationship with not with the local authorities specifically, but with local authorities in general, with the regulations. Actually, citizens, be they migrants or not, actually require or wish to have some space where to enact, of course, according to shared rules, but to enact some activity they find relevant for themselves and for their community. But it's quite hard to find this space. The public authorities, as in the policy recommendation is well described, I think, tend to send you back the ball. If you wish that, please organize. But when you organize, sometimes you are not seen as a resource pretty much, but as another problem to deal with. I would not like to go very far, but it's not maybe by chance that in the COVID time, small sport association and private association-led clubs for cultural and recreational activities are among the organization and among the activities which have been penalized the most, because they have been locked down harder than other organizations. But those are exactly the places where any citizen can show up and have its role and find out a relation with others. So there is a contradiction. Either volunteering is a resource, either it is a problem. Please choose. I would say to our local authorities and regulation system. I would like to say that in this I agree very much with Professor Thompson when he said that the authorities should listen, most of all listen to these volunteers. And that's what we try to do actually, and that's what we would like to happen, because the main answer is not so much as about, of course, that's important, we all live on money, but it's not so much about money. It's not so much even on, I say, or language or cultural curses, because in relation with the people, such things in our experience build up in a way, I would not say by themselves, but pretty much. And we only need an occasion. And this occasion is to recognize spaces much more than it is done now to civic action of any citizen. Clear rule, not too many, please, because we have to understand easily what we can and cannot do. And then please give us some kind of way, because that was the most important. The last thing, I find it, of course, very important that you stressed how it could be an incentive to see recognized for work or training and education purposes, the non-formal competencies one can acquire also by volunteering. There are experimental things going on in Italy, probably in other countries, because it is a topic which is on the table already since I think at least 10 years now, maybe something more. I see it as a long way, because it, that's my personal view, it goes into conflict with formal education somehow. But it's of course worth working on it. In Italy, we're starting to see something happening in the framework of education for the what is called the student CV. And very, very slowly at the public offices dealing with work placement. Mm. It's for sure a road worth walking on. We should insist on that too.
Thank you very much. I would like to wrap this session up by just giving some brief comments from the point of view of Volpower. So I'm the moderator, but still I'm saying something about Volpower. Some of you said that these policy recommendations are quite comprehensive. What we need to keep in mind is these are policy recommendations that have been drawn up from interviews with 60 to 70 people in 7 different contexts. So there are contexts where with a very, very pronounced amount of diversity, with very elaborate volunteering schemes. And on the other hand, there are other contexts where volunteering is not so popular. So what we try to do in this policy recommendation, this is why they are so comprehensive. The second thing is we have a lot of recommendations concerning organizational structures. This is because we had interviews or focus groups of people working in organizations, and they talked from the organizational point of view in terms of what they would wish to have accomplished. And just some very brief responses to Robin and to Susan on belonging and citizenship. There are countries like Austria where there is indeed a fast track to citizenship if you can prove that you have volunteered for 3 years. So there is indeed this direct connection between volunteering and citizenship. And in terms of belonging, we looked at this in Volpower, and what we have seen is that being involved in volunteering enhances the feeling of belonging. What we learned is, and this is something new for me, the young people talked about bubbles they belong to. So this is not about societal belonging for them, but it's the volunteering bubble and the family bubble. So they have these multiple feelings of belonging to different groups of people. This I found quite interesting. Sona, please ask me something. I know I'm not.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, I would like to ask whether you have looked at the religious dimension of volunteerism. Religion plays an important role, at least organizational activities of this volunteerism. I don't know this topic very well, but I know that they are highly involved. So this is not like a space very like you just take it very, whatever we call it. So there is different kind of elements involved. States try to outsource this kind of activities, for example, to deal integration aspect of migrants, refugees, or asylum seekers to NGOs. NGOs uptake these roles. And in that context, how do you see the volunteerism? So is it a space which we should see different aspects or ideologies or sources, at least sources of volunteerism? Mm-hmm. One point is that. The second one, I totally agree with Leila's comment about mainstreaming volunteerism in public policy making. I think that is the key to just go ahead. So we should always put the state in the center to sort out this kind of issues. Otherwise, they are always trying to escape from their own responsibilities. Thank you.
Okay. The religion question does some people from the other AMIF project talked about religion in their projects in Volpower. We didn't look at religion. I have to say that. So is there anybody who has worked in the field of it doesn't seem to be like that. So though, yeah, of course, large volunteering organizations, they all have their ideologies, or they may be of a religious background, yes, but in terms of Umut, please go ahead.
If I may actually respond to Sona's question, I mean, that had been a discussion in terms of social capital creation, the role of religious organizations. However, religious spaces, they were not really considered to be neutral spaces in order to discuss the neutrality and the value of social creation per se. So I suppose they are more considered as organizations, more institutional organizations, rather than organizations where informal labor is involved in creating commonalities and all that. However, this doesn't mean to say that obviously the churches, they had a particular impact in reception in 2015, etc. And when Soner and I, we used to work in another EU-funded project about Husula as well. In that project, Respond, multi-level governance of migration in Europe and beyond. So when we were doing, I was leading research on Hungary there, and when we were doing interviews in Hungary, we came to realize that the churches, they were active in 2015, but their activity was curtailed, and it was pretty much replaced by the government. But nonetheless, even when we're doing these interviews or discussing with them, at the back of our minds, the issue was always how neutral a space would that be in terms of their level of accommodating diversities, etc. So I suppose it's an interesting question. It is a question to be tackled with, to what extent those kind of spaces are neutral or not. But ultimately, I think we have to reinstate that they certainly contribute to creating social capital in one way or another. So,
thank you. I will just do a brief comment before I give the floor. Leila, please. I see there is one more. Yes, Leila.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to say something more on education, which is I think very, very important actually when we talk about inclusiveness, integration. We actually talk about set of values. That is a precondition for well integration, for a vibrant civil society, for volunteers who are prepared for the challenges, to support integration, to help vulnerable. So I think what you said here is that we need to support education on volunteering in our schools and our universities, and it is really important, and it's happening more or less around Europe. But I think we need to go to do more. We need to connect volunteering with civic education, with civic competences, and in that way create a more or stronger connection of volunteering and the set of values that will help us, not just, of course, with inclusiveness in volunteering and inclusive volunteering programs, but it will help us in preserving and developing fundamental European values. And it will help and make volunteering impact on productive European future even more important. So that I think is worth to mention here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.